Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank you for responding to our invitation for this press conference, and apologies for the change in time that we did at very late notice. Let me introduce the persons who are here at the head table. To my far left is our opposition spokesman on transport and works, Michael Phillips. Beside him is Elaine Foster Allen, who is the chair of our Education Commission and the former permanent secretary in the Education Ministry and in the Office of the Prime Minister. And immediately beside me is our spokesman on education, Ronald Thwaites. The press conference will be led by Ronnie, and we'll have questions after. Mikhail will make some comments on the state of transportation leading into back to school, and our chairman is going to join us up here. Just come and take a chair. Fitz Jackson.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I'll invite Ronnie to make his statement, and we'll proceed from there.
Thank you very much, Julian. Chairman, Michael Phillips, Mrs. Foster Allen, colleagues in the media. The People's National Party is a party of education in Jamaica. And we want an education in 2018 which works for all, not just for some. And therefore our posture is not oppose, but to collaborate with all elements in the education system and to criticize for improvement. So we are taking a positive, not a negative view of the education enterprise. Education is too important for partisan scrapping. We're very concerned, however, about several unsettled issues within the education system prior to the opening of schools next week. We're concerned that the back-to-school experience for the majority of the nation's children and their parents will be often confusing, frustrating, and off-putting on account of several issues that need to be urgently resolved. Of course, one of the issues is auxiliary fees, the availability of specialist teachers and the migration of many of our excellent teachers, the school feeding program, and there are others which I will mention. I suppose the one that's most on the minds of people has to do with so-called auxiliary fees. Well, I remember in 2016, the Minister of Education indicated that auxiliary fees were abolished. We shouldn't even use the term. Well, last weekend, the Prime Minister himself was speaking about auxiliary fees. The parents of Jamaica have been told that the payment to the schools is an optional payment, and in addition, that there has been a waiver of such fees for public sector workers. We ask the question, how can you waive something which you said doesn't exist? Please tell us how you resolve that contradiction, because the truth is that there are two truths in respect of this matter which the PNP espouses. One, that no child must ever be excluded from school because of poverty. Everybody must go to school. And secondly, it is that the financing of education requires a partnership between the state, parents, and the community. And it is wrong and unhelpful to dilute the necessary role of each of those participants. And so, if we're going to waive the fees for the public sector workers, please make sure that the money in place of those fees is paid over before the beginning of the school year, because the schools need it. Principals are not extortionists. Principals need money in order to be able to deliver quality education in their institutions. The subventions for various elements of education have been increased, and this is good. However, those increases have long been outstripped by a devaluing dollar and an increase in the cost of living over the period. Therefore, let's get real, we say. Let's do a clear cost on the real value of education in money terms. And let us make sure that all of those participants in the partnership of education are contributing as best they can. So we encourage parents to contribute as much as they can, as required by the school, and we also insist on pain of loss of job that you do not keep anyone out of school because their fees, their auxiliary fees, have not been paid. So let us be very clear on that. Every school child is turning up with a voucher this September morning, from infant school right through to tertiary education. Send the replacement money if you do not want them to be, if they are not able to pay. And let us be clear on what it costs to run the school. Announcement was made today about paying the cooks in schools. Well, we're hearing that for the third year running. We're very glad. And there are other school expenses which would otherwise have to be made up from parental contributions. Again, we need a clear costing. Our anecdotal survey tells us that it's going to cost somewhere in the region of $35,000 to send a child back to primary school properly equipped, and probably as much as $55,000 at the secondary school level when you take into account all of the expenses. The state cannot bear all of that, neither can parents, many of whom are marginally employed or unemployed. As Dr. Phillips has said, we want to eradicate educational apartheid, you see? And one of the main areas in which inequality in the education system is manifest is in respect of the quality of pedagogy of teaching, particularly in the areas of language and mathematics. The people in the primary schools are in fact being instructed, certainly from grade 3 upwards, in Jamaican Standard English. The People's National Party wishes to confront the nation of Jamaica with the reality that many of our children do not understand what they are being taught because their language, their first language, is Jamaican Creole, not Jamaica Standard English. And therefore, we propose a detailed discussion, of which we will play a part, for the appropriate transition from Jamaican Creole into Jamaican Standard English as a far more intentional step of improving literacy in our schools. One of the main problems of inadequate outcomes in the schools is the weakness of literacy. We still have 25 to 30% of our children in any grade who are unable to properly comprehend the books that they are encouraged to buy, many of them at huge and unaffordable expense, which they will never properly use, or indeed to receive the oral instruction that they are presented with. The problem with mathematics teachers is a long-standing one, and we are very pleased that the government has continued a policy begun during our administration for the special teaching of, or the scholarships for mathematics teachers. Frankly, this needs to be tripled if we are going to move beyond the situation where at least a third, close to a half of all of our students leave school with an inadequate preparation in mathematics and therefore in science. Do you know that it is probably 30 to 40% of our primary school teachers in mathematics who have not had a certification in mathematics? Many of them have not even taken and passed CSEC in mathematics. This is not to blame them, nor is it to blame the government. It is simply to alert, as an opposition responsibly must, what are the urgent priorities upon which the nation must concentrate and upon which state resources must even more so than now be dedicated. There's another problem. The problem is that we have lost approximately 250 specialist teachers to migration this year so far. And this is an ongoing annual chronic situation. The number is not certain because many teachers take up offers and don't even give the notice or don't appear on the statistical graph. We are going to have to develop incentives which will encourage our teachers to remain in Jamaica, certainly for a bonded period when they have received training at government expense, but the differentiated pay according to special abilities is an area of educational administration which we are prepared to discuss and to come to a conclusion on, difficult and controversial though it has been and will be. I want to go on to the issue of the school feeding program. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, it is undeniable that some 30% and probably more of our children go to school hungry every day. Empty bag cannot stand up. We began, before leaving office in 2016, a program that would have seen breakfast available to those who needed it, as well as a lunch program. It would take probably another $4 to $5 billion a year to ensure that every one of our needy children, remember some 300,000 of the 600,000+ students in school are on PATH. By definition, those students cannot find the resources to get to school or to be fed. The party is insisting that the resources be allocated to ensure that children who need it have the opportunity for a structured breakfast and lunch program in order that they may best benefit from the opportunities of education. We salute as heroic those communities, those schools, and indeed the efforts of the state to move towards that position, but it is still not complete and inadequate, and it is contemptuous of the needs of our students that we cannot achieve this. And there is one other aspect of it also. 95% of the ingredients used in the school feeding program are imported food. They form a major part of the $1 billion that Jamaica spends on importing food annually, when in fact, significant portions of that can be and ought to be provided from local resources. We have not made sufficient efforts in this regard. When I served as Minister of Education, I tried to get fresh fruit, juice concentrate into the school feeding program, and the linkage between the agricultural sector and the educational sector simply was not strong and frustrated much of that. It still has not been achieved. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, can you imagine what a boost it would be to a number of things? One, overall economic development, growth of GDP, a strengthening of the agricultural sector, and the appropriate nutrition, not the bag juice and bulla of the present time, if our children had local produce to eat. How we would shape their dietary tastes to avoid the epidemic of obesity, which everyone accepts is one of the major non-communicable disease scourges of our time. We in the PNP commit ourselves that for the future, when it is our opportunity to direct policy again, and even now when we can advise and encourage that the linkage between domestic agriculture and school feeding must be advanced apace. Some $5 billion is spent abroad on products from abroad to feed children. Why can't our farmers earn that money rather than us fattening foreign farmers? In this regard, we would like to commend the sentiments that are expressed in the Gleaner editorial of today on the same subject. We have heard that the bag juice and bulla are to be banished, but tell me now, what are the substitutes derived from local produce for the nearly 300,000 students who experience hunger at school starting next Monday morning? There's another feature. Presently, those students on PATH, I'm reminding you, some 50% of all students receive an allocation for feeding and for all purposes of about $150 a day. Respectfully, with the increase in the cost of living, cost of items, $150 is not adequate. And we are proposing that that amount be substantially increased. I'm speaking for myself now, not for we haven't canvassed this in the party, but it needs to be doubled to $300 a day if we are going to be able to ensure that our children not only get to school 5 days a week, I'll come to that in a moment, but also have adequate feeding. It would probably cost us another $5–6 billion a year. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, that would be an investment that would be well made. I wish to point out that so far the government has not been able to take action on the very serious issue of absenteeism in school. It connects with a lot of the issues that we have raised already this morning. Please be advised that some 20% of our children don't go to school 5 days a week, and many miss much more. It has to do with transportation difficulties, lunch money difficulties, and also an element of our Jamaican culture which feels that going to school every day may not really be worthwhile, is not the first priority, and can somehow be an optional issue. Government, opposition, every member of Jamaican society who recognizes that wholesome and complete education is the only legitimate means of upward mobility, the absolutely indispensable foundation for sustainable economic growth, the cornerstone of whether it is 5 in 4 or 2030 achievement is excellent education and training. We as a nation, the People's National Party asserts, must insist that the proper provisions in the Education Act and regulations regarding truancy be now brought into force, and not with draconian measures, but with strong persuasion and indeed where necessary sanctions, and provision of necessary assistance, that our children come to school 5 days a week. That is essential. When you miss a day, whether it is a traditional Friday or another day, you are missing 20% of your education. Can you imagine the consequence of that? You can't pick up. That's the truth. Another issue that concerns the party and for which we have strong suggestions is as follows. The nation is aware of the inadequate levels of English and mathematics competencies, as evidenced in our GSAT examination, soon to be replaced by the PEP, which we'll get to and which I'll ask Mrs. Foster-Allen to speak on, but also and consequentially at the CSEC level. We have even had to undergo the expense and indignity, members of the press, to have remedial courses in English at the university level. So we don't need more evidence that this is so. One of the reasons why this is so has to do with the ambivalence about language, of which I originally spoke, and the difficulty of teaching mathematics. But we compound those deficiencies by putting our children on a treadmill where they are promoted every year according to their age, not according to their performance. Please see the press of today where Calabar High School is taking a step in this regard. I understand the difficulties attached, but they are to be supported. There is no point in moving children from grade 6 into a high school in grade 7 with all of the expense and the aspiration connected with that when they cannot read and write properly. Similarly, that only sets you up on the escalator of failure when you reach to grade 11. And we have already seen the recent results and commentary from CSEC and the unfortunate response from the Ministry of Education regarding those thousands of Jamaican students, indeed Caribbean students, who don't achieve matriculable levels at the end of 12 years of education. The answer is not to dumb down the examinations or to provide alternatives, although there are some equivalent alternatives. The answer is to deal with the fundamentals, to do it right the first time and ensure that many more of our children, in fact, perform with the excellence that their God-given talents bespeak, rather than be placed in situations where we think we are helping them, but in fact, they are not achieving the desired objectives. Our Jamaican children are no less bright than those in Singapore, in Finland, or in South Korea. What we need is proper teaching and proper organization and proper parental and community support to make the difference. And therefore, the People's National Party puts forward for discourse a position that says, in order to be sent up to the next grade, what you must do is to achieve a reasonable level of success at the previous grade you are in, or stop dead, correct that situation, and then move on. I wonder if members of the press are aware that we are spending, by anecdotal evidence, some $1 billion a year on extra lessons and remedial efforts. Look what that could do in terms of the substantial system at the lower grades, rather than being tried to make up, usually with limited success, the disappointment, the waste of time that occasions. One of the things which we support the government in education most fulsomely is the recently announced emphasis on early stimulation for little children for the first 1,000 days of life. All the science tells us that that period is most crucial in terms of brain formation, in terms of all of the approaches to higher education, right through. That is from conception to the end of the second year. From conception, not from birth, from conception to the end of year 2. They are to be commended, along with persons like Dr. Sams Vaughan, who has brought the science to the policy now in this regard. Where are the social workers? Where is the rollout of that program, we are asking? The People's National Party stands resolute with our various and widespread organizations throughout the country to help in this regard. And we challenge our colleagues, well-wishers in the churches and voluntary organizations to line up for that early stimulation program and to make sure that it is more than just mouth talk and that it begins and takes bite right away. I am anxious, yes, that we should comment on tertiary education and the funding and also on transportation, but I think that I ought to pause now and ask Mrs. Foster-Allens to make her contribution, particularly but not exclusively, on the issue of the primary exit test, which is of public importance.
Thank you. So we believe that teachers have some legitimate concerns about the primary exit profile and the national standard curriculum. In particular, their concerns have to do with them not understanding what is expected of them, and also the way in which the professional development activities were undertaken. They also have a concern about the fact that in some schools, I don't know how many, but in enough schools, the hard copies of the national standard curriculum were not available, and they just could not access the soft copies. Now, you can understand the challenges that would pose to teachers who are trying to prepare to go into schools on Monday morning if they just cannot access what they're supposed to be teaching. So there's also a concern where teachers are concerned, and we agree with them, that the inconsistency of the message from one trainer to another has posed a huge problem for them. So one trainer will say A and another trainer will say B about the same thing. And the teachers have said this can't be so. So we're calling for a new grassroots, on the school ground, in the classroom approach to be taken to the professional development activities for teachers in regard to the primary exit profile in the first instance, and later with the majority of professional development activities. Because the research tells us that when professional development activities are undertaken nearest to where teachers are expected to deliver what they're learning, it's best for the teachers and it's best for the children. it also encourages teacher collaboration at the grassroots level. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our spokesman on transport, Mikhail Phillips, just to speak about some concerns related to traffic for traffic for the opening of the school.
Thank you. As the start of the school year begins next week, as an opposition, a responsible opposition, we have been making the call even before the summer break and with the road constructions taking place, mainly in the KMTR and on the Mandela corridor, that we have seen, and I have had discussions with the Prime Minister, who is the minister in charge of the National Works Agency, of our concerns on the lack of traffic management on the construction or the areas of where the road works are being carried out in the KMTR. As the school year comes to a beginning, we have a further concern on how, especially in the areas where the road works are being carried out, in the areas of where there are schools, of the type of traffic management that is going to be deployed on Monday when the school term begins. We have seen right through the projects, starting from when the roadworks were being done in Barbican, the lack of flagmen, the lack of just proper direction and safety for the traveling public. We're seeing now in the vicinity of Constant Spring Road, in the Manor Park area, where we have schools like Immaculate, where there is even a lack of availability for pedestrians to be crossing. And quite a few of these students in the going to Queen's High School, going to Immaculate, and those on the Hagley Park corridor, that there is adequate pedestrian area being put in for these students who have to take a public transport and going to school, that there are adequate traffic warders put out into those areas for the guidance and protection of the students. Also, that there are adequate flagmen, because even though there is going to be a rerouting in the 3 miles area, there is going to be, or what we have seen so far, the congestion, especially on the Constant Spring Road corridor, that be dealt with urgency, because when you have much more, at least 20 to 30% more vehicular traffic on school mornings, this is going to be a challenge for those students, especially those taking public transport, and especially for those who will be coming from rural and trying to get to school at a decent time. So we're just calling on the National Works Agency, we're calling on the Prime Minister himself, who is the minister responsible for the National Works Agency, to not wait until it becomes a problem on the first morning of school, but that there's adequate planning be put in place prior to, so that we can have a smooth reopening and smooth, the public traveling smoothly on come Monday morning. We're also having a concern of the availability of seats being provided by the JUTC, especially coming from the Portmore municipality. There has been a shortage of seats, buses coming from the Portmore, and seeing that has not been resolved over the period, that there is a concern if there will be adequate seating, especially come Monday when the school term begins, coming from the Portmore and the Spanish Town leg. Also the concern that we have also with the gas prices and the effect on the transport sector itself. What we have been seeing, and a concern myself and Mr. Thwaites had a discussion on it, on the proliferation of illegal transports. And because of the shortage of seats being provided by, or the lack of seats being provided by the JUTC, the risk to the traveling public and to students that this will cause, the safety of our children going to school. And we're asking for the authority, the Minister of Transport, the Transport Authority, to put adequate mechanisms in place as we, especially on the routes going from Papine to Halfway Tree, from downtown to Halfway Tree, Crossroads to Papine, and from downtown to Manor Park, those corridors, and you have on the Washington Boulevard to Halfway Tree, those corridors with the proliferation of illegal transport, that there's some mechanism put in place to regulate it urgently, as we do not want to continue putting the risk of the traveling public, especially our children, at risk as come this new school year and going further along. So our concerns is really, and just hoping that the NAA, the contractors China Harbour, do what is necessary to ensure a smooth beginning to the school year, and to ensure, mostly on those areas where construction is being carried out, that there is adequate pedestrian areas for pedestrian, for the walking public, be able to use with safety, and that there is adequate safety mechanisms put in place for children returning to school on Monday.
Thank you, Mikhail. We're on to questions. Any of the presenters or any questions?
Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News. I have quite a few questions, but I'll start
Good.
start with the one regarding differentiated pay. There is this matter that this was raised during your tenure as Minister of Education, and we understand that unfortunately at the time it did not come to fruition. One would argue that there was not enough political will to resist the JTA on the matter. What would have changed between then and now, where you think that differentiated pay would be more acceptable? That would be my first question.
What has changed is the more acute situation of teacher migration, that we're simply going to have to find ways that reward scarce skills, as in any aspect of economic life, more so than those skills which are more easily attainable. Secondly, it need not be done in any unfair fashion. Additional duties, additional requirements for qualification can all be so calibrated as to create an entitlement for better remuneration for those who undertake those, and for those whose skills are really needed. It is a difficult task, but it has to be dealt with, because otherwise we are going to have the continued hemorrhage.
Okay, then my next question regarding the PEP. This matter raised by the president of the JTA calling for a delay of the PEP by 3 years. Do you feel it is a fair requirement, considering that they have had 2 to 3 years to raise their concerns regarding the actual education and the actual rollout of the program? Why wait till the last minute, the 2.5 weeks before the rollout of the examination and the actual assessment?
I don't think that the PEP should be delayed. I think that additional support should be given to teachers to do what they need to do. Because as you said, it's been quite a while. It's 2015, 16 since the preparations have been going on. The piloting started in 2000 and I think it was 13, 14.
The piloting for the new standard curriculum.
Standard curriculum.
Could I help with the answer? The difficulty that teachers are facing is that the primary exit profile examination, yes, good examination we feel,
It is a good example.
is based upon the new standard curriculum, which has not had time and circumstances yet to be fully ingested by our teachers. What we were doing was engaging the new standard curriculum in phases.
Right.
Pilot some subjects and then go on. Right. Then the decision was taken to bring it all in. When was it? 2016. Okay, now that's 2 years to when the PEP is coming in. And I really feel that there is a legitimate position by many teachers that, look, you are giving us a new curriculum to teach to a new examination, and the two are coming too closely together. I agree with Chairman Foster Allen that what is needed now is an intense effort to bridge that gap, not a postponement. But the concerns of the teachers must not be rejected.
Okay.
Any other questions?
With that being said, though, many parents we've spoken with complain that they're still using the GSAT books, and there's still some form of confusion as it relates to that. So if the teachers can't understand and the parents aren't any clear, how do we move forward with this?
Only in the by the measure that we suggest, that where you have a really intense infusion of the new curriculum and the new testing technology. Not, may I insist, by dumbing down the examination so that it doesn't look bad. Yes, it's going to be a difficult task. My own view is that we wasted this summer. There should have been ongoing efforts now. It shouldn't only be coming up, as Siobhan really says, at the end of the period. It is going to take an intensity of effort which the Jamaican education system is not accustomed to, but must now inevitably undertake.
May I just say that in regard to curriculum implementation, and when you're changing curriculum, you're changing resources and all of that, it's imperative that those who are at the school level actually know what they're supposed to do and can interface with parents, teachers, the wider community about the changes that are taking place in a sort of local face-to-face context. That is not to say that at the macro level, at the level of government, that the ministry should not have been driving that support for head teachers, principals and teachers in schools so that they understand the transition, that parents understand the transition, and that where there are confusions and confusing messages, that those are dealt with before you actually, settle into the new national curriculum or indeed the assessments that follow.
Further
Something
questions?
needs to happen at the school level.
Before we close then, may I mention two matters that I think are worthy of the consideration of the press. There are many students, I speak of many of those in constituencies like Central Kingston, who have done just what we wanted them to do. Stay in school, do very well in their examinations, and now matriculate to tertiary institutions, and they cannot attend because of a want of funds. We're very grateful for the liberal policies of the Student Loan Bureau, but that has limits. The nation needs to consider that our money, hundreds of billions of dollars of it, remain in the financial system, either not lent out, trading in foreign exchange to the detriment of everybody, or being used for consumer expenditure to buy cars and other things, but not available largely for funding tertiary education. And the People's National Party, I've spoken with Dr. Phillips particularly on this, is committed to working with the financial institutions in ways that are not happening now to ensure that the cheap taxpayers' money that the Bank of Jamaica is being made available to them translates in sufficiently to the task of equipping the nation's students, young people, older people as well, who need to change their career and have advanced training, in order that this may be avoided. Jamaica has no secure economic future unless we are able to describe and show ourselves as being a supremely well-educated, trained, and sociable people, where those of the working class, of the unemployed, are being prevented by prevailing financial policies, despite the superfluity of resources, our resources. If you hear the intensity of my voice, it's because I consider that cruel and counterproductive. Second, we've heard, although it's a relatively minor matter, the new policies and guidelines regarding dress in schools. We welcome those, we welcome order, and we welcome liberality insofar as it is within the context of order. Do you know, members of the media, that it is estimated that teaching and learning time in Jamaica is probably compromised by about 40% by a teacher just having to see to proper dress, punctuality, who did their homework, who lick who have a headache. Yes? While the worldwide average is of effective teaching and learning time is not over 60%, but probably over 80%. The level of productivity in our education system and the whole issue of deportment, sociability, dress is part of it. Yes, is something that we have, a systemic issue that we have to look at most closely. It's not a political issue, it is a national issue, but it is a duty of a conscious political party which prides itself on effective education as its first priority to bring this to the nation's attention. I thank you.
Thank you very much. You have one more? Take one, we'll take one.
I'll throw out the other one just in case. You heard the education minister pointing out that this is a guideline, this is a grooming guideline, not entirely an enforceable policy. What do you make of that assessment by the education minister, meaning essentially saying, please be aware that this guideline exists, but we cannot actually enforce it upon the schools themselves? What do you make of that?
I believe that the governing institution of a school is the school board, and that it is appropriate that strong guidelines be given, but that ultimately the specific rules of a particular institution be determined and enforced by the school board.
Then, if you don't mind, regarding your statements on tertiary education, I would like a more fulsome statement. What you suggested essentially is that you would like more efficiencies in government, and the money that would be saved from those efficiencies be put towards tertiary education. In what way? What way do you feel that government should step up its funding of tertiary education?
I think you misunderstand a bit. Certainly, I can address that, but I'm really speaking about the money that's in the banks. Yes? The Honorable Fitzjackson is perhaps the ranking expert on that in the People's National Party and in the nation. I'm speaking about the, what is it, $600–700 billion worth of savings in this country. Yes? That goes, if it is lent out at all, to buy car and consumer goods on credit cards. But try and get a loan for education from a bank, and you have to mortgage your grandmother's teeth. Yes? Now, we have to do better than that. And I don't wish to be censorious, but we have to develop programs where our savings can be used to advance that which is indispensable for our future. Yes? I support Damian Crawford on the one graduate for each family. You can't have that given the class skew of our Jamaican society without intentional effort to finance learning. As far as the government's financing is concerned, yes, there's certainly a great deal that they can do to guide available funds towards education that is needed for national development, particularly certain professions, but also not leaving out the humane professions, or the humane studies. Yes, that is very important. And I think that one particular instance of this, which is mentioned, is the inequity between the University of the West Indies and UTEC. UTEC gets about 1/5 per student of state assistance as the University of the West Indies. There are all kinds of historical reasons for that, but it is not fair. And we're not suggesting that UWI should be reduced at all, but the University of Technology provides a vital function, particularly for vocational and STEM education, and must be supported further than it is now by the state.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.